I was simply saying that as it being a justification. I mean, my interest or forte is not so much on World War I or not on the Iraq War in recent times, and that's something I definitely want to get more into.
Okay.
But World War I and World War II, I've spent a lot of time, and certainly the Civil War was just one of the clearest examples. And for me, I remember reading these books and just realizing this is just beyond absurd. This is this.
World War I was sold to us as the war to end all wars.
Right.
And then World War II was the war to end all wars. What religious justification were they giving for those two wars?
I think World War I was strictly a balance of power thing, but to paint the Germans as the bad guys. One of my favorite quotes that I came across, I wrestled with this. Having a very strong Christian background, I wrestled with this thing called pacifism, which we all know about, but I always have found it since then to be rather tragic and ironic that some of the first people to line up to demand the United States go seek retribution are the Christians. I always joke about to myself and to friends on 4th of July and Veterans Day services, the God, Guns, and Glory service, whatever, and it doesn't really mesh with the readings or the teachings of Christ as we know them to be. When he says, pray for your enemies that persecute you, all this, again, things that have fascinated and intrigued me with religion and how we take verses, or Christians have taken verses that apply and are interesting, whether it applies to gays or whatever, but when it's things that are close to home, well, that's different. He didn't mean that, on and on and on, so.
Are you supporting pacifism?
Well, that's an interesting subject too, but I think I'm supporting seeking knowledge and learning from history as much as possible, because there are times when pacifism doesn't solve cases either. One of my favorite agnostics is, which I discovered was my favorite children's book writer, A.A. Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh, and he never told his son to be an agnostic or an atheist. And he would just send him literature and things to read. And I can't remember the story, which two books he gave his son, but his son was fighting World War II and wrote his father back and said, Dad, I think I'm an agnostic. And Milne wrote him back and said, I never wanted to tell you how to believe. I know the tradition of our church and of our country, but that has always been my belief as well. But Milne had written a book against England entering World War II. He wrote, not a book, but a treatise on that. As much as he was branded forever with Winnie the Pooh, which he ended up hating, he wrote an autobiography and spent 8 pages on that, devoted to that. But after the war began, he wrote a retraction of all that he said before. And he said across every page of that previous essay that I wrote on pacifism, right across each page, the word Hitler. And one of my favorite quotes I found was one called, it is useless for the sheep to pass resolutions in favor of vegetarianism as long as the wolf remains of a different opinion. Meaning, if you can't back up what you believe, then...
How about the Quakers, who really are opposed to all war? Is that a position which you could support?
I think, yes. I think the bottom line with warfare is that war can be just, but the times that they can be are far and few between. And I think when we exercise some feeling that we are on the side of God, I think that's where the danger occurs, and that is one of my biggest bones of contention with religion at all, because it can justify war so easily. And when we develop this mindset that we are on God's side, then the other side is clearly in the wrong. We don't engage in debate. We don't engage in dialogue. We immediately put them out as different people, and it makes it much easier to go to war with them.
What is your opinion on military chaplains?
I think that's actually something I would love to write about, because in the readings I've come across, or the writings I should say, one of my favorite writers is the guy Siegfried Sassoon, who was one of the most famous poets of World War I, and he was a Spanish Jew, half English royalty, and his father was a Spanish Jew, and just a phenomenal poet. And he wrote about the chaplains, and it was never in good light, ever at all. It was always looked at with scorn. And again, in America, we love to parade the Christian stories of soldiers and things and how their faith got them through. But America, a lot of historians, this might be controversial enough, but most historians that I know would completely agree that D-Day wasn't even necessary. All that we have of this great museum here, but the real bloodshed and the real victory in the war against the Germans was carried out by the Russians. And there was no writing. Any of the books that I've read thus far, I have not read one German talk about his faith in God on that battlefield, because it was in such a condition of complete horror and loss, where there was no pretenses about what was going on, and there was no sort of faith. They had no hope left. They were on the bad side of history, or the wrong side of history with what had happened. But you just saw humanity for what it was. And to me, I saw a beauty and a love of people that didn't need to have religion to still be something of people caring for one another.
So you do agree there is such a thing as an atheist in a foxhole?
I absolutely agree. And I think if the foxhole has been seen enough stuff, that I think most people end up being that way, because I think in that kind of carnage and that kind of loss, there's no sense of normalcy. They long for a return to where we can play a game of averages and make this thing God work. But I've never seen that from the readings I've undertaken.
Now, you had indicated to me that you had an interest in possibly writing a book on the religion's influence on warfare in modern history, and I'm wondering, do you think that religion influencing warfare, at least in this country, is unconstitutional? Are the chaplains unconstitutional?
That's a very valid point. That's quite interesting. I think that a lot of the people that end up joining the military are there. I think it's a marriage of convenience and a marriage of, I guess that's the best way to describe it. You don't want to have it isolated off, and when things aren't in a condition of war, when there are things that happen, I think people turn to religion and faith as a means of trying to make sense of the things they can't make sense of. And I think that the agnostic community and the atheist community will always do the best job when it's such a sensitive subject, from my own experience of trying to discuss things with my family and so many other people, that if we approach that with the same kind of hostility, I've seen the same from my own experience, people just withdraw behind their walls. But it's a matter of saying, look, this is the evidence, these are the facts, these are the situations, you tell me what you think. Encouraging dialogue and thinking is, I think, the thing to resolve that. But in terms of taking chaplains out of the military with funerals and all that, so many people turn to that. And so I think it's kind of, it is what it is. It's culture until culture changes. But constitutionally, separation of church and state, I 100% would agree with that.
All right, and you indicated that you are working on a master's degree in military history.
Correct.
How far along are you?
I've gotten a little ways in. I'm actually trying to work with a friend of mine to do some historical tours back in Europe because of these sites that are really fascinating and really feed that interest. But I think for a PhD, I'd actually want to go into religious history and then put those two together. And
are you keeping journals and diaries? And
I blog a bit. I've blogged quite a lot and have been reading a lot. And then since this kind of came to me, I've been reading every book that I've been reading on these personal accounts and things. I've been dog-earing the pages for all these sections where they get into discussions of anything religious or the fact that it's not religious. So,
David, thank you for being with us. I want to thank all you folks who are watching our show, and be with us again another time.